This video is going to look at how we translate conditional sentences from Latin. Now you'll have noticed straight away that these are conditional sentences and not conditional clauses. The reason for that is that conditional sentences come in two halves. You need the first half, which is the if half, and the second half, which is the rest of the sentence. But they work together. They're going to take the same tense. Now, for the sake of GCSE, this page is all that you need. So these are indicative conditions. There is a second half of the page that we're going to come to later on with subjunctive conditions. They're not needed for GCSE, but they're quite fun to look at. So conditions can take place in three times. They can take place in the past, the present, or the future. And the tenses they use are the tenses that you would expect them to use. So in the past, we're going to use the perfect indicative tense. If the ship left, mother saw it. In the present tense, we're going to use the present indicative. If the ship is leaving, mother is watching it, because that's what mother likes doing. She likes watching ships. If the ship is leaving, mother is watching it. And finally, and the most common of the three, the future indicative. If the ship leaves, mother will see it. It is worth noting at this point that we can see the first of the strange tenses that you find with conditional sentences. Latin says if the ship will leave, because it's the future. But in English we say if the ship leaves, mother will see it. Now these are indicative tenses, and these are open or possible conditions. In other words, there's no sense of whether the condition happens or not. In the past, we don't know if the ship left or not, but if it did, mother saw it. In the present, we don't know if the ship is leaving or not, but if it is leaving, mother is watching it. And finally, in the future, we don't know if the ship is going to leave, but if it does, mother will see it. So they're all completely open or possible conditions. Now the fun starts when we introduce the subjunctive into these sentences. Now the tenses that we use are very important. We use the pluperfect subjunctive for past conditions. We use the imperfect subjunctive for present conditions, and we use the present subjunctive for future conditions. Let's see what they look like then. If the ship had left, mother would have seen it. This is a closed condition or an impossible condition because it's implying that the ship didn't leave. Because if it had left, mother would have seen it. And the fact that this cannot have happened means that now we're going to use the subjunctive. Notice that we use the subjunctive in both halves of the sentence. If the ship had left, mother would have seen it. If we look at the present version of this, we get if the ship was leaving, mother would be watching it. And now we're using imperfect subjunctives. You can see it has the infinitive inside it. If the ship was leaving, mother would be watching it. More technically, if the ship were leaving, which is an English subjunctive. If the ship were leaving, mother would be watching it. And the most common of all of these, perhaps, again, is the future, and we get a very strange tense for this in English. If the ship were to leave, mother would see it. But of course in English, because we do things in a very strange way, we tend to change that and we say if the ship left, mother would see it. And so we change were to leave into, bizarrely, a perfect tense. So when we have a closed or improbable or impossible condition, we use a subjunctive. If the ship had left, but it didn't. If the ship were leaving, but it isn't. And if the ship were to leave, but to be honest, it's quite unlikely. With those sentences, I use the subjunctive. If I'm making no claims about whether it's going to happen or not, I just use the indicative. And again, for the sake of comfort, these are the conditions that you're going to find when you do GCSE.